They never warn you about the real dangers of moving to the suburbs. Sure, you hear about the traffic, the PTA moms, the occasional raccoon in the trash cans. But nobody tells you about people like her. I'd barely been here a week. My furniture was still half in boxes. But that Sunday, I decided to do something simple, something normal, build a fence. Nothing fancy. Just a modest, 6-foot wooden fence so my dog, Cooper, wouldn't wander off. It wasn't a statement. It wasn't art. It was just a fence. And right as I hammered in the last nail, proud of myself for not screwing it up, I felt eyes on me. The kind of stare that makes the hairs on the back of your neck stand up. I turned around and there she was. Karen. I didn't know her name yet, but believe me, you know a Karen when you see one. She had that look, pastel yoga pants that had never seen a yoga mat, a clipboard clutched like it was part of her skeleton, and a tight smile that said, "I don't have hobbies, I have power trips." She didn't say hello. She didn't ask how long I'd lived here or even comment on the weather. She just pointed at my fence like it was a crime scene. "That fence has to come down," she said, her voice sharp and smug. I blinked. "Excuse me?" She sighed, like I was a child who just didn't get it. "It's an unauthorized structure. HOA regulations. You have 72 hours to remove it." I laughed. I actually laughed, because I thought this had to be some weird neighborly joke. But her face didn't move. "It's just a fence," I said. "It's an unauthorized fence," she repeated, scribbling furiously on her clipboard. And just like that, she spun on her heel and walked away. I stood there, sweat running down my back, watching her march off like a drill sergeant who'd just declared war. Across the street, Bob Jenkins' lawn looked like a flamingo breeding ground. 2 houses down, the Hendersons' garage door was Barney the dinosaur purple. But apparently, my fence was the crime of the century. That was the exact moment I realized, I hadn't just bought a house. I'd bought a front row seat to Karen's kingdom. And I was about to find out how deep her claws went. At first, I tried to shrug it off. Maybe she really was just doing her job. Maybe this was one of those neighborhoods where people took fences way too seriously. I figured I'd let it sit for a few days, see if she cooled off. But Karen doesn't cool off. Karen escalates. It started with letters. Neat little envelopes stuffed into my mailbox, each one stamped with that cheery HOA logo that somehow felt more threatening than a court summons. The first letter? A formal violation notice for the fence. No surprise there. But the next day, another letter showed up, this time, apparently my grass was too long. I had mowed it 2 days before. 2 days. But okay, fine. Maybe I missed a spot. The next day, another notice. My mailbox, according to Karen, was 1/4 inch too tall. 1/4 inch. I measured it myself. Twice. She was right. But who even thinks to check that? Then came the one that really made me question my sanity, a noise complaint. Excessive noise, it said. I live alone. My dog, Cooper, is the laziest golden retriever you'll ever meet. The loudest sound coming from my property is him sighing on the porch. It wasn't just enforcement. It was harassment. I tried confronting her again. Caught her on her morning power walk, that aggressive march she does like she's patrolling a prison yard. "Karen," I called out, holding one of the violation letters in my hand. She stopped but didn't turn around. "Karen, this is ridiculous. I'm not throwing loud parties, I'm not running a jungle out back, and my fence isn't hurting anyone." She finally turned, her expression syrupy, sweet and condescending. "I'm simply making sure everyone follows the rules, Sam. If we let one person bend them, then what's next? A boat parked on someone's lawn? Funny she should say that. 2 streets over, there's an actual boat sitting in someone's yard, covered in a blue tarp like we're all supposed to pretend it's not there. But apparently, I was the neighborhood menace. I decided to test a theory. The next morning, I woke up early, grabbed a cup of coffee, and watched from my window. Right on cue, Karen walked by, and not casually, either. She stopped at my property line. Looked around. Reached into her pocket. And I swear on my life, she pulled out a handful of leaves and threw them onto my lawn. My jaw dropped. I installed a security camera that afternoon. 2 nights later, I caught her on video knocking over my trash cans at 2 in the morning, then taking pictures of the mess with her phone like some suburban detective. The next violation notice arrived less than 12 hours later, garbage containers improperly stored. I was done. I stormed over to her house, practically vibrating with anger. Before I could knock, the door swung open. Karen stood there with that same smug smile. "Did you need something, Sam?" "You're sabotaging my property," I spat. She blinked innocently. "I don't know what you're talking about." "You threw leaves on my lawn." She actually laughed. "Leaves fall, Sam. It's autumn." It was summer. I clenched my fists, took a deep breath. "Look, this has to stop." Her smile didn't waver. "You have 24 hours to remove the fence." And then, before I could respond, she gently closed the door in my face. I stood there for a long time, staring at her door. She wasn't going to stop. And I wasn't going to back down. If she wanted war, she had just picked the wrong enemy. That night, I sat on my porch with a cold beer in one hand and my laptop in the other, still fuming. Karen had made it clear this wasn't about rules or community standards. It was about control. And if she thought she could push me around like some scared newbie who'd fold under pressure, she was in for a surprise. I pulled up the HOA bylaws. I read them twice. Then 3 times, just to make sure I wasn't imagining it. Buried deep in that dry, soul-sucking legal jargon was a little gem. Fences under 6 feet had strict regulations, but fences over 6 feet? No mention. No height limit. No restrictions. Nothing. It was like finding a cheat code in a video game. I sat there, staring at that line, a slow grin spreading across my face. If Karen thought my current fence was a problem, she hadn't seen anything yet. The next morning, I started making calls. Lumber yards, contractors, engineers, I wanted this thing done right, legal, and bulletproof. When I told the contractor my plan, he burst out laughing. "Buddy," he said, "this is the most passive-aggressive project I've ever heard of." I'm in. By the end of the week, the trucks rolled in. Huge panels of treated wood, steel reinforcements, concrete footings that could survive a tornado. My backyard became a construction zone, and I loved every second of it. Every hammer strike, every drill whir, felt like sweet revenge. It didn't take long for Karen to notice. I was sipping my coffee, watching the crew hoist the first 12-foot panel into place, when I heard it. A high-pitched screech from across the street that could have shattered glass. I looked over and saw her storming toward me, face redder than a stop sign. "What the hell is this?" she shrieked, pointing at the growing wooden wall like it was a crime against humanity. I took a slow sip of my coffee, savoring the moment. "My fence," I said simply. "This is a joke, right? You can't put this monstrosity up." "Actually," I said, pulling a neatly printed copy of the bylaws from my pocket, "I can." I handed it to her, the relevant section highlighted in yellow. She snatched the paper, eyes darting over the text. When she hit the highlighted line, her mouth opened, then closed, then opened again, like a fish gasping for air. For the first time since I met her, Karen had nothing to say. "Enjoy your day," I said, turning back toward my house. I didn't even bother hiding the grin on my face. But the best part? That fence sparked something. Like flipping a switch in the neighborhood. Bob Jenkins, who'd been quietly enduring Karen's nonsense for years, ordered 24 more flamingos and lined his entire driveway with them. The Hendersons painted their front door bright red, the exact shade Karen had once forbidden. Walter Peterson, bless him, brought back every single garden gnome Karen had forced him to remove 2 years ago, doubling their numbers just for good measure. The neighborhood wasn't just watching. They were joining in. Karen had ruled with fear for too long, and now, people realized they didn't have to take it anymore. She tried to keep up, of course. More letters, more threats, more frantic clipboard notes. But the more she pushed, the more we pushed back. I could see it on her face every time she passed my house, that tight smile getting tighter, her eyes twitching just a little more. She was losing control, and she knew it. And I was just getting started. Karen wasn't the type to go down quietly. For every fence panel that went up, for every flamingo that appeared on Bob's lawn, for every rebellious act around the neighborhood, she fought back with more letters, more threats, and more desperate attempts to claw back control. But you could see it, the cracks were showing. She was used to people folding the second she pointed to her clipboard. Not this time. Not anymore. Then came the emergency HOA meeting. I found the letter in my mailbox, thicker than the usual violation notice, complete with bold lettering at the top, urgent HOA meeting, addressing recent community disruptions. Translation? Karen's last-ditch effort to make an example out of me. I showed up early, took a seat in the back, and waited. The room filled up fast. I wasn't the only one curious to see how this would play out. Bob sat 2 rows ahead of me, looking smug. The Hendersons whispered to each other, probably plotting their next bright-colored rebellion. Even Walter Peterson was there, leaning on his cane with a gleam in his eye. At the front of the room stood Karen, clipboard in hand, hair pulled back so tight I was amazed she could blink. Her smile was forced, her eyes darting around like she was preparing for battle. She cleared her throat. As you all know, she began, her voice tight and controlled, our community has always prided itself on maintaining a certain aesthetic standard. There was a low murmur. However, she continued, recent events have challenged these standards. Certain individuals have chosen to disregard regulations, creating chaos and disrupting the harmony we've all worked so hard to build. Her gaze locked on me. I took a sip of water and smiled. Karen pressed on. While our current bylaws may contain certain loopholes, I am proposing an immediate amendment to prevent further abuse. She clicked her pen and pulled out a stack of proposed changes. No more fences over 6 feet. No more excessive lawn decorations. No paint colors outside the HOA-approved palette. The list went on. The room was silent, until Margaret Reynolds raised her hand. So, let me get this straight, Margaret said, her voice calm but sharp. You want to change the rules because someone followed them better than you expected? Karen blinked. I'm trying to preserve the integrity of our neighborhood. Bob spoke up next. You didn't seem too concerned about integrity when I put flamingos all over my lawn. Laughter rippled through the room. Or when we painted our garage door purple, added Mr. Henderson. Karen's face paled. Her grip on the clipboard tightened. Then came the real bombshell. Walter Peterson, of all people, cleared his throat and spoke, slow and deliberate. I'd like to motion for a financial review of the HOA. You could have heard a pin drop. Karen's face froze. That's not necessary, she said quickly. But it was too late. The room erupted. People stood up, talking over one another, bringing up old complaints, suspicious fines, unfair treatment. Years of pent-up frustration spilled out all at once. The board members, who usually sat quietly and let Karen run the show, shifted in their seats, uncomfortable. They called for a vote right then and there. The result? Unanimous. Karen was removed from her position as HOA president on the spot. She sat there, stunned, her face slack with disbelief. And for the first time since I'd moved into that neighborhood, I felt the air clear. But I wasn't done yet. I thought that would be the end of it. Karen was stripped of her title, publicly humiliated, and the neighborhood was finally breathing again. But Karen wasn't the type to accept defeat gracefully. No, she was the type who would claw and scratch for every last ounce of control, even if it meant setting the whole house on fire on her way out. A week after the meeting, just when I thought peace had finally settled in, a knock came at my door. Not the mailman, not a neighbor, but an official-looking envelope hand-delivered by someone from the county zoning board. My stomach twisted before I even opened it. Inside was a formal complaint. Karen had taken her vendetta beyond the HOA, straight to the county. She claimed my 12-foot fence violated county height ordinances and was an unsightly structure damaging the character of the community. The same woman who had allowed flamingos, purple garage doors, and gnome armies was suddenly concerned about character. I nearly laughed out loud. But there, in fine print, was the part that mattered. County regulations required a special permit for any fence over 8 feet. A permit I didn't have. Karen had found her loophole. For a moment, I panicked. But only for a moment. Then I called my lawyer. The same one who helped me dig through the HOA bylaws was more than happy to go another round. We filed for the permit immediately, but we didn't stop there. I submitted a formal request for a financial audit of the HOA's books at the county level. After years of Karen's reign of terror, I had a hunch there was more rot under the surface. And I was right. It didn't take long for the auditors to uncover it all: thousands of dollars misappropriated, invoices for community projects that never existed, expense reports for spa weekends and personal shopping trips, all paid for with HOA funds. The story blew up. Neighbors who'd stayed silent for years came forward, sharing stories of shady fines and whispered threats. Karen's carefully built facade collapsed overnight. Another emergency meeting was called, this time, not by Karen, but by the homeowners themselves. One by one, the evidence was laid out. Karen tried to defend herself, but every excuse was shredded by receipts and records. The board, desperate to salvage what little credibility they had left, voted to permanently ban her from any HOA involvement. Her resignation wasn't just accepted, it was demanded. Rumor has it, she sold her house and moved 3 towns over. Some said she was looking for another neighborhood to fix. Me? I sat on my porch with a cold beer in one hand, Cooper at my feet, and my glorious, 12-foot fence standing tall behind me. For the first time since moving in, I felt like I could breathe. But sometimes, late at night, I wonder. How many more Karens are out there? Have you ever felt powerless against HOA, or Karen, rules? Share your experiences below, let's see who had it worse.